Strikes in Gaza as a dangerous escalation, warning they threaten an already fragile ceasefire. Israel says the strikes respond to a Hamas violation, while medics report at least 25 people are killed in the latest attacks. A Philippine court sentences former Mayor Alice Guo to life imprisonment after finding her guilty of human trafficking. Authorities say Guo, later identified as a Chinese national, Guo Huaping, ran for office under a false Filipino identity. Sudan's army chief, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, says his council is ready to work with the United States and Saudi Arabia to bring an end to the conflict. The statement thanks regional mediators and follows President Trump's pledge to coordinate efforts with Gulf states to stop the fighting. The Israeli military says Hezbollah is violating a ceasefire by rebuilding operations in southern Lebanon near the Israeli border. It says dozens of sites, including headquarters and weapons stores in civilian homes, have been identified around the village of Beit Lif. Now, our top story of the hour, the ongoing Epstein situation in the United States, and former U.S. Treasury Secretary and former Harvard President Larry Summers is stepping down from a series of high-profile positions as scrutiny intensifies over his long-running correspondence with Jeffrey Epstein. Summers announced his resignation from the OpenAI board, and Harvard later confirmed he will step away from teaching and take leave from directing the Mossavar Rahmani Center, while the university reviews individuals named in the newly released Epstein files. Though no evidence links Summers to Epstein's criminal activities, the revelations have triggered a wave of consequences. Several organizations say he is suspending his roles with them, and the New York Times will not review his contributor's contract. The developments come as President Donald Trump signs a bill requiring the release of Justice Department's Epstein's records, a move he had previously opposed. Okay, joining us now is Peter Baum. He's the editor of the Weekly Blitz, and he joins us live from London. Peter, a hugely significant day in US politics, and with Larry Summers stepping down. What kind of ripple effects is this going to trigger ahead for the political elite throughout Washington and beyond, of course, once these files are released?
Yeah, good morning, Thomas. Great to be with you again. The consequences are going to be far-reaching, and I think I can give you some breaking news. I don't think it's exclusive to myself, but it hopefully will be exclusive to news, to your channel as we speak, because it's real time. I've just been in contact with some sources in Washington, and the story here has huge geopolitical consequences. If I may just explain why. You would have been aware that just a day or so ago, Elon Musk attended the White House dinner with the hierarchy of Saudi Arabia. This, in the mainstream media, went past very quietly, whereas the rift between Musk and Donald Trump was all over the news, as we quite remember, for weeks. Please bear with me here, Thomas, because it's all to do with the Epstein files. Now, the rift here is between the United States administration and Qatar. I'll explain why. Donald Trump would not have released the files if he felt that he, as an individual, was to be implicated. He's not. But where the release of the Epstein files has been damaging to him has been the far right of the MAGA movement, which want to embarrass anyone, whether Democrats or Republicans, who are connected either religiously, culturally, ideologically, or politically to the State of Israel. The MAGA movement are currently being funded by Qatar. All these far-right influencers that we're seeing daily admonish Trump for not releasing the files have a financial axe to grind, and we've seen the likes of Tucker Carlson, Candy Sewing, and many others on the far right who are intent of ensuring that those on the far left and those who are, as I say, associated with Israel are embarrassed. Now, Trump is aware of this, and that's why he brought Elon Musk on board to ensure that the great influencer is going to do his bit to smooth the path open, not because of embarrassing Trump, but because of the split within the Republican movement. That's what Trump sees as damaging. Now, as far as Trump is concerned, he doesn't care how many Democrats, irrespective of whether they're associated with Israel or not, are damaged by this. He really doesn't care. In fact, it would be a win for him. Hence, he felt comfortable enough in releasing the files. But what he's not comfortable with is Qatar funding the far right, who are doing their utmost to embarrass anyone associated with Epstein who may also be associated with Israel. And that is a real rift, and that is the issue that Trump and his administration are facing at the moment. So the mere fact that Elon Musk, after a huge fallout with Trump, is now back on side, gives you you must ask yourself, well, why is this? And it's simply because of Musk's influence in the world of social media.
Indeed, and of course this is going to be a huge development when these files do effectively come out. They do have the next 30 days for the Department of Justice in order to process anything. Of course, Pam Bondi here, Peter, has promised transparency. In full transparency is what she said specifically. How much of that do you think we are in reality expected to get?
Yeah, this again is going to be interesting. Now, as I said before, Thomas, I firmly understand that had Trump been personally implicated more than he is, other than the photos we've seen of him posing with Epstein and shaking hands with him, he would never have gone as far as he has done in releasing the files. I expect there to be full disclosure. Trump himself would be stupid if he went this far and decided after the 30-day limit, which you're quite rightly pointed out, he says on to the world, no, we're not going to release anymore or not disclose anymore. Full disclosure, I expect, will come. There could be some redactions, and he could use the policy of stating that America's could be at risk from external parties, etc. He could always use that, and that may indeed happen. But I suspect, having gone this far, his main effort now is going to be focused on ensuring that those far-right MAGA influences, funded by Qatar, as I've suggested to you, tone down the rhetoric.
Yes, indeed, Peter. Thank you very much for joining us. Do stay with us, actually, as we have further updates, but this time coming out of the Middle East for our next story. And the Israeli military has accused Hezbollah of violating the terms of a ceasefire by attempting to re-establish itself in southern Lebanon, a short distance from Israel's northern border. In a post on X, the military has said that it has identified dozens of what it calls terrorist infrastructure sites in the area of a village, including headquarters and weapons storage facilities, some of which were placed inside civilian homes. The IDF has also posted a video pointing to the places it claims are Hezbollah sites. Meanwhile, the Israeli military has struck a Hezbollah weapons storage facility in southern Lebanon. The Israeli military has kept up frequent airstrikes in Lebanon in spite of a ceasefire sealed last year in November that sought an end to more than a year of hostilities with the Iranian proxy. The latest raids come after 13 people were killed in a strike that Israel said had targeted Hamas leaderships in a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon this week. Peter joins us once again. Peter, of course, accusations of ceasefire violations fly between both parties when it comes to Hezbollah and Israel. However, of course, the Israeli military saying that it is going forward with stepping up operations. This must be quite concerning for those affected in the areas, and of course the fragility of this ceasefire, which was signed last November.
Indeed, Thomas, and let's be frank about it. The ceasefire has been broken, and these are the reasons why. Both the IDF and the Netanyahu cabinet and Hezbollah operatives and those supporting Hezbollah have come to the correct conclusion that the Lebanese army, who have been charged with the responsibility of disarming Hezbollah, don't have the competencies to do that. Therefore, Hezbollah feels quite emboldened in ramping up its manpower and smuggling in weapons, and Israel too feels the right and the need and the necessity to stop that. And the Lebanese army, as I say, who politically have been charged with the responsibility of disarming Hezbollah, are powerless to intervene. Until such time as that dynamic changes and Lebanon, who are trying to become more influential militarily, they are ramping up manpower, they are getting political support and military training from a variety of nations, including the USA, but they're in no position yet to undertake their objectives that has been forced upon them to, as I say, to disarm Hezbollah. And thus, we will continue to see these outbreaks, these skirmishes, until such time as the Lebanese army is in a position to do what Lebanon's government said it will try and do. Hezbollah, undoubtedly, apart from being a military influence in Lebanon, are a political influence, and they are indeed members of the Lebanese army who support Hezbollah, mainly the Shia Muslim bloc within the Lebanese army. So it's a very difficult position, and the fear is that these sporadic skirmishes get bigger, more frequent, and another conflict, a wider conflict occurs. America and the actions of the Syrian government, who can stop the smuggling routes of weapons into Hezbollah, and indeed are trying to, are the two main factors that will ensure that will determine what happens in weeks and months to come.
Yeah, and Peter, this follows just a few days ago where the Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament said that Hezbollah has the right to rebuild itself like any organisation. Is this worrying discourse?
Yes, of course, and for that he's been condemned by certain parts of the political spectrum, not only in Lebanon but in the region as well. But this really exemplifies what Lebanon is all about. It's broken into religious groupings, Sunni, Shia, Druze, and political groupings that support those religious groupings, such as Hezbollah and the Shia bloc. So it's a very, very awkward situation for all parties. Naturally, the good faith actors do want to see Hezbollah disarmed and just take its place as a political force.
Yes.
But Hezbollah, like Hamas in Gaza, is unwilling to do that. And until such time as enough pressure is brought upon them either politically or militarily, I'm afraid we're going to continue to see these sporadic outbreaks. If they can be contained, as they have been over the last 4 or 5 decades, but with the various wider conflicts, such as the Lebanese wars once a decade, we may see history repeating itself, Thomas. We may really see another outbreak. The only difference here, the only comfort factor here is that Iran, currently isolated and currently in a very, very weak position, does not have the financial, political or military influence over her proxies as she once did. So therefore, Hezbollah will never be as strong as she once was, unless, of course, that situation changes on the ground in Iran.
Yeah, and of course it's important to reiterate to our viewers that, of course, Hezbollah is also a political party which holds around 12 seats in 15 seats, apologies, in Lebanese government. You see Hezbollah moving forward as purely a political force in Lebanon, in the south, where indeed it, of course, does operate healthcare, schools and other facilities.
Well, that would be the wish, and all good faith actors would want that. But Hezbollah itself, still ruled by totalitarian theocrats, have this desire to eliminate the Jewish state of Israel. Now, I cannot for the life of me see Hezbollah's ideology changing. Will we get some more moderate clerics ruling Hezbollah? Perhaps, but I don't see that in the near future. So therefore, Hezbollah is determined to build itself up again militarily from the shocking defeats that she suffered during the Gaza war. She's able to do that, but this time without the support, as I said previously, of the Iranian regime, or without the large support of the Iranian regime. And that could itself ensure that Israel militarily, should Israel inflict severe losses on Hezbollah going forward, may determine if Hezbollah says, well, okay, chaps, we'll just act as a political force, doing the job that she is doing with social welfare, for example, in Lebanon. But at this moment, Thomas, I don't see that happening. Rather the reverse. Hezbollah is trying to build up its military operation again and its manpower, and I think we will continue to see skirmishes as we've just witnessed this week.
Yes, Peter Bourne, thank you very much for joining us in that discussion. It's always a pleasure to talk to you here on the channel. We now move on and over to the Indo-Pacific, and a Philippine court sentenced Alice Guo, a Chinese national who posed as a Filipina, to become the mayor of a town north of Manila, to a life imprisonment on human trafficking sentence. 7 of her co-accused received the same. Guo was found guilty of operating a Chinese-run online gambling hub where hundreds of trafficked workers were forced to run scam operations under the threat of torture. Prosecutors said the facility functioned as a large-scale trafficking and coercion network disguised as a gaming centre. Let's take a listen in.
Finally, after more than 1 year, napakabilis po ng korte, binigay sa atin yung favorable decision. So, convicted po si Alice and yung pong other 7 accused. Life sentence po, and forfeited po ang entire Baofu compound in favor of the government.
It is not just a victory for the government, but a victory for the victims, for the community, and pati na rin sa ibang bansa. Makikita natin kasi ibang biktima ay may mga foreigners.
We're now joined by Shruti Dasgupta. She is an international affairs expert, and she joins us live from New Delhi. Shruti, thank you very much for joining us. What more can you tell us about this interesting case?
No, is that Alice Guo pretended to be born in Philippines when she was not actually. In her teenage years, she traveled with her family to the islands. and where she faked her for her Philippines ID to later become the mayor of her small town north of small town Bamban. And there is where she ran this giant infrastructure facility with 36 buildings, housing about 700 to 800 people from various nationalities, running the scam center under, as your report claimed, a gaming center. And her fingerprints were found to be of Chinese or registered to a Chinese person named Guo Huanping, if I'm not wrong. And thus she was proven to have never been applicable for the post that she was holding, and obviously that in itself is a crime. And then the organized trafficking, which Philippines has been marked by the UN report being famous for. Organized trafficking is something that it has been marked in the UN report for, and this particular center is part of it. So Alice Guo's case is something which some of them are calling her as a spy, a Chinese spy, but I think it is something of something that is a world over problem, where people don identities that are not their own and gain political power and then misuse it to run crime cartels and get away with it due to their political powers.
Yeah, and Shruti, how does this play into the narrative? Of course, the broader amount of scam centers which operate particularly out of the Southeast Asian region?
Well, there are more than one. They have investment scams, they have the honey trap, romance scams, they have the phishing and spoofing scams, and all of it has a large part of it coming from the Philippines. So the president, I believe, has shut down offshore gaming centers, which were a front for a large part of this industry. And this industry, and it's a lucrative industry. I think America alone lost, I think, $10 billion in 2024 to these kind of scams that are run by these scam centers. So this is part of it. And if there is so much money involved, then there is definitely corruption involved in it, because it is not possible for 700, 800 people to be in a small town and not be noticed for the activities that they're doing. So that is where Alice Guo plays an important part. She is an illegal immigrant probably to Philippines. Her identity is fake, and then she gained political power to control the narrative of the region. And so there, if they look deeper, there will be many other people under her who probably got their palms greased so that this industry can grow. So as a whole on Philippines, they need to take a deeper think into how this kind of an industry is flourishing right under their nose, under the entire state machinery and mechanism, and the cost that the common people end up paying for the kind of scams that are run through these centers, as well as the people who are running these centers, people who are part of the machinery of these centers, the smaller cogs, they are themselves victims of organized crime. So there is a bigger, deeper question that the world needs to look at when they look at Philippines and Alice Guo.
Yes, Shruti Dasgupta, thank you very much for speaking to us as always. Pleasure to have you here on the programme. We now move on next and to some breaking news. And 42 people have been injured in a train accident where an express train has collided with another passenger train in the southern Czech Republic. The accident has occurred near the city of České Budějovice, around 150 kilometers south of Prague. The spokesman for the rail operator Sprava Železnic has said that all passengers have been evacuated from the trains and that the investigation on the cause of the crash is ongoing. Now we move on, and Brazilian President Lula da Silva put his roadmap away from fossil fuels back at the centre of COP30 negotiations in Belém today, even as a bold push for an early deal fell short. Lula arrived in the Amazonian host city to personally rally ministers and negotiators, urging countries to commit to a long-term transition beyond oil, coal and gas, while stressing that no nation would be forced into fixed deadlines. His renewed calls comes as Brazil circulates a draft pact and presses delegates to bridge differences before the summit's scheduled end. Let's take a listen in.
Tem muita responsabilidade. E é por isso que nós colocamos a questão do mapa do caminho. Ora, porque é preciso a gente mostrar para a sociedade que nós queremos, sem impor nada a ninguém, sem determinar o prazo, que cada país seja dono de determinar as coisas que ele pode fazer dentro do seu tempo, dentro das suas possibilidades. Mas que nós estamos falando sério. É preciso que a gente diminua a emissão de gás de efeito estufa. E se o combustível fóssil é uma coisa que emite muito gases, nós precisamos começar a pensar como viver sem combustível fóssil. E construir a forma de como viver. Por isso que nós tratamos isso com muita seriedade. É por isso que todos os dirigentes do mundo têm que saber que cuidar do clima é cuidar da manutenção e da existência do planeta Terra, porque ainda não encontramos outro lugar para nós sobrevivermos. Cuidar do clima é saber que os países ricos precisam ajudar os países pobres.
Meanwhile, the European Union and Denmark introduced a competing proposal, arguing it better reflects the UAE consensus. Meanwhile, activists filled the venue with chants and fake banknotes demanding that wealthy nations and fossil fuel companies pay for clean energy transition and replenish global loss and damage funds. With tensions rising, negotiators now face a defining test whether COP30 will deliver a historic fossil fuel phase-out or stall amid deep divisions. Now, the US Commerce Department has said that it has authorized the export of advanced artificial intelligence chips, the equivalent of up to 35,000 NVIDIA Blackwell chips, to two companies in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Meanwhile, Tesla CEO Elon Musk and NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang have announced partnerships with Saudi Arabian artificial intelligence startup Humane at the US Saudi Investment Forum. Musk and Huang have both confirmed the development of a 500 megawatt data center in Saudi Arabia, and Huang has added that NVIDIA is working with Saudi Arabia to build supercomputers to simulate quantum computers. Let's take a listen in.
We worked together to get this company started and off the ground, and just got an incredible customer with Elon. Could you imagine a startup company, approximately $0 billion in revenues, now going to build a data center for Elon? 500 megawatts is gigantic. This company is off the charts right away. In addition to that, we're working AWS, as you know, is also
Congratulations
coming.
to the Humane team with AWS, starting with 100 megawatts with a gigawatt.
Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome viewers, I'm Pia and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. On that note, let's take a look at news making headlines this hour. The Israeli military has announced that it has commenced targeting Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon following warnings to residents in two villages. The airstrikes are reportedly aimed at destroying Hezbollah's terror infrastructure in the region. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has presented a new initiative aimed at improving the speed of military movements across Europe and transforming the defense industry to address emerging threats. This comes as she speaks on the need for stronger protection of Europe's critical infrastructure. Slovakia is contemplating legal action against the EU over its plan to halt Russian gas supplies by 2028, citing concerns over economic impact. Prime Minister Robert Fico has stated that both Slovakia and Hungary heavily rely on Russian energy and are worried that more expensive alternatives could harm their economies. Both chambers of the US Congress have now approved a bill requiring the Justice Department to release its files on Jeffrey Epstein. The House passed the measure overwhelmingly with a 427-1 vote, and the Senate too passed it in a unanimous vote. President Trump now has indicated that he will sign it once it reaches his desk. The World Health Organization has reported that nearly a third of all women worldwide have faced intimate partner or sexual violence. WHO Chief Tedros has condemned the lack of progress in addressing this pervasive injustice, as this new report reveals that 840 million women have been affected by some form of IPV. The new virus variant and slow vaccination rates may lead to a severe flu season in the United States. Health experts are now monitoring the mutated subclade K strain, which has caused early surges in the UK, Canada and Japan, according to a CDC report. While flu activity in the US is still low, it is increasing rapidly. A Russian missile strike on Ukraine's western city of Ternopil has killed at least 25 people, including 2 children, making it the deadliest attack in weeks. These come as Ukrainian President Zelensky was scheduled to continue talks in Turkey later in the day. Poland vows to respond soon to a railway explosion it blames on 2 Ukrainians allegedly collaborating with Russia. Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski has condemned the attack as state-sponsored terror, stating that the response will include diplomatic measures. Well, viewers, those are the headlines, and our top focus, what's taking place in the Middle East. The Israeli military has announced that it has started targeting Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon following warnings to residents in 2 villages. The airstrikes were aimed at Hezbollah's terror infrastructure. Israeli military has also asked residents in the 2 villages in southern Lebanon to be evacuated. This comes after an Israeli strike near the Palestinian refugee camp in southern Lebanon, which killed 13, while Israel claims that they were targeting a training compound of the Hezbollah. Lebanese Health Ministry claims that it was civilians who were struck. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has visited Israeli troops who are stationed beyond the ceasefire line in Golan Heights. He was accompanied by top officials, including Defense Minister Israel Katz, Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, the Army's Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir, and the head of the Shin Bet Security Service, David Zinni, as well. Israel has maintained a presence in the UN patrolled buffer zone in the region since the overthrow of former Syrian President, Bashar al-Assad in December. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Saul Satka, security analyst and author, joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World as we track these very crucial developments. We do know that strikes have been taking place in southern Lebanon. One of the key concerns that Israel has at the moment is with regards to the regrouping of Hezbollah. Hezbollah has so far shown no intent of disarming. Meanwhile, the Lebanese army has blamed Israel, stating that it is not able to live up to its ceasefire conditions because of these strikes. What do you think will now proceed from here? Because the United States too has made it very clear to Lebanon that it is time that they get their act in order and pressurize Hezbollah to disarm.
The situation in Lebanon has not improved in 40 years, 50 years even. Lebanon has been a basket case for 50 years. There's no prospect of it really improving on its own as it happens. The Israelis have made it very clear over the past year, more than a year now, since a ceasefire took place in Lebanon, between Israel and Lebanon, that if the Lebanese themselves were not going to disarm Hezbollah, the Israelis would continue to attract them. Hezbollah have been trying to rearm. Their ability to rearm is very limited, but they have nevertheless been trying. And Israelis are intent on attriting them faster than they can rearm to ensure that they no longer pose a threat to the Israeli civilian population. And that's what's happening. That's what I assume will continue to happen for the indefinite future, because Lebanon, unfortunately, is a state that does not function and has never really functioned. It is full of militias that compete with each other. Hezbollah is a Shia militia. They control about a third of the population. They have the largest army, even after the Israeli attrition that occurred over the past 2 years. And in the long run, only Israel will be able to defeat them. The Maronites, other Christian groups, and the Sunnis are much weaker than Hezbollah, even still, and don't seem to have the will or the wherewithal, or both, to be able to reduce them in power sufficiently to make Lebanon a functioning unitary authority. One can only hope for Lebanon in the future that they manage to reorganize their state, perhaps as a federation where the various denominations have control over some parts of the territory with their own militias, but at least that it should function, because currently it does not function.
Indeed, and apart from Lebanon, we've also seen a very crucial visit by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's visited troops beyond the ceasefire line in Golan Heights, which are stationed currently at the UN buffer zone. What sort of signal is this sending to not just President al-Shara in Damascus, but also to Washington?
It's a clear signal from Netanyahu and his government that Israel will no longer play footsie with terrorists. There won't be any terrorist armies on Israel's border, and they will keep their forces in depth within foreign territories if that is what is required to ensure that civilians are no longer under threat. Israel would very much like to have peace with its neighbors, including Syria and Saudi Arabia, for example. But nevertheless, it has succeeded and become by far the wealthiest major state within 1,000 miles without peace with Syria or Saudi Arabia. And it will certainly not risk its civilians for a small economic benefit when economics are really not the issue at hand. They intend to maintain the buffer zones as required. My guess is that the summit of the Hermon Mountain, which was previously within a UN buffer zone and is now under full Israeli control, will not be withdrawn from very easily by the Israelis. And they're rather fortifying it and setting up some spy equipment up there that vastly expands Israel's strategic horizons. And I think it's very unlikely that they will withdraw from that.
Absolutely. It does provide strategic advantage to Israel. But since you've mentioned Saudi Arabia, I'd like to digress a little bit over here. We've seen what's taken place at the Oval in the White House today, Trump meeting Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. There's been a $142 billion deal that has been inked between the United States and the Saudis with regards to the sale of F-35 fighter jets. So far in the Middle East, Israel is the only country that operates the F-35s. We've seen their capability in the 12-day war with Iran as well. To what degree is Israel really concerned with regards to this sale and its implications in sort of changing the delicate balance of power in the Middle East?
There's a lot more happening under the radar that is not open, that people are not aware about. So it's very unclear what the reality is. My guess is that from speaking to people, the Israelis are not concerned at all about the Saudis getting F-35s because the Saudis, while they will be able to fly them, it won't give them sufficient edge over the Israelis to make them ever be able to threaten Israel themselves. Israel has plenty of countermeasures Israel is entirely capable of shooting down rockets and mortar shells out of the sky, they are not threatened by standard fighter jets, even if they are stealth and low cost action, etc. So they're not particularly worried about that. I think the Israelis are quite comfortable with it. They might even be in favor of it, because as much as the Saudis, even if they won't sign peace with Israel, and even if that never comes to pass, which is possible, although rumors have it that the major bloc is MBS's father, the king, who is currently very frail, but he is currently blocking the peace between Israel and Saudi, and that everyone involved wants it to happen, and it will happen soon. But even if it never happens, it could be that Israel is very keen for the Saudis to have these weapons, even though they will not arrive for at least 5 years, because that will provide a strategic problem for Iran, which is everyone's real enemy in the Middle East. Israel is not interested in having any kind of fight with the Saudis, and the Saudis definitely don't want any fight with the Israelis. And the F-35s won't help them in that balance of power.
Absolutely. With that, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Solsatka, for taking out time, of course, providing your perspective on these very crucial developments. On that note, viewers, we're shifting our focus away from the Middle East towards what's taking place in Europe. We're now learning that EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has emphasized the need to strengthen Europe's critical infrastructure and enhance rapid military mobility to bolster continental defense. Speaking alongside EU commissioners, Kallas has highlighted the importance of ensuring that forces can be deployed in the right place and at the right time. Listen in to her comments.
Our critical infrastructure needs more protection. The fast movement of Europe's militaries is essential for European defense. We have to ensure that forces can be in the right place and at the right time.
Now, the announcement accompanies a new EU package aimed at improving the rapid movement of military forces across member states and transforming the defense industry to address emerging threats. The initiative seeks to streamline cross-border military transport and enhance coordination among EU members. With us on the broadcast is Mr. David K. Johnson, who's an author, joining us from New York. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. We've just heard what Kaja Kallas has had to say. This, of course, comes with regards to the barrage of attacks that are taking place against Ukraine. We've recently also seen a railway explosion take place in Poland. The Poles have, in fact, pointed their fingers at Russia. Slovakia, too. The Fico government has also called for strengthening the eastern flank. Amidst all of this, Kaja Kallas has come out and pointed towards the need to strengthen Europe's critical infrastructure to enhance a rapid military mobility to basically overhaul the logistics frameworks. I want to understand from you at the outset, what do you make of these statements, and if she is talking about a need to overhaul the logistics framework, the logistics systems that are in place, what's really needed to be done on that front? Mr. Johnson.
Sorry about that. 9 months after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the EU's military operations began looking at the ability to move tanks, airplanes, and other heavy equipment. And they did research, quickly established that many bridges and railway bridges just are not equipped to carry something as heavy as a modern tank. There have been incidents in Europe as well where civilian authorities refused to allow the movement of military equipment because it was too heavy and would break up and damage local roads, as well as the pipes and other things underneath those roads. So this is an effort by Kallas to try and get Europeans to recognize that they need to take action, not just study the problem, because of the increasing aggressiveness of the Kremlin with the drone flights, the various incidents that you cited.
Indeed. And as I mentioned earlier, we'd also seen an attack that had taken place in Poland on its railway network in particular. The Polish foreign minister has in fact pointed fingers at Russia. There are 2 Ukrainians who have been alleged to have colluded with Russia, carried out the attack, then they have fled to Belarus. If it has been done by the Russians, is Russia trying to send some sort of message by targeting the railway network in particular?
Well, what Kremlin is trying to do is intimidate the European countries and to say, leave me alone as I try to conquer Ukraine. And to test the resolve of the European members of NATO to stand up to Russian aggression. There will be more incidents as Putin and his generals try to find weak points and things they can exploit. And they have among the leaders of EU countries a few allies to the Kremlin perspective of domination of the kind we saw up until the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989.
Indeed, sir. Requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates, this time from Slovakia. We're now learning that Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has announced that his government is considering to sue the European Union over its plans to halt Slovakia's Russian gas supplies from 2028. The move comes as Slovakia and Hungary remain highly dependent on Moscow's energy and worry about the costs of alternatives. The Slovak PM has also tasked his economy, foreign and justice ministers to analyze options for legal actions against the EU. Listen in to what he further said on the matter.
Bude dokument na rokovaní vlády budúci týždeň, kde zvážime možnosti podania žaloby. Bude veľmi záležať všetko od toho, ako si plní Európska komisia záväzky voči Slovensku, ktoré boli dané a podpísané priamo predsedníčkou Európskej komisie. Rovnako chcem zopakovať, že Slovenská republika hlasovala proti tomuto rozhodnutiu, pokiaľ ide o REPowerEU, zastavenie toku plynu, a myslíme si, že týmto rozhodnutím, kde sa inak mala vyžadovať jednomyseľnosť a ktoré bolo prijaté len väčšinou členských štátov Európskej únie, boli porušené viaceré základné predpisy Európskej únie ako tak.
Now, the Slovak Prime Minister has not specified how much it can claim while suing the EU or what legal basis it can use in the process. Additionally, Fico has also commented on EU's proposals to use frozen Russian assets for Ukraine, which is estimated at about 140 billion euros. He stressed that these plans raise legal questions and uncertainties, and he does not support any mechanisms that would lead to confiscation of Russian funds. Slovakia has earlier also opposed the European Union's policy towards helping Ukraine's defense. In fact, recently, Fico, while meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, had emphasized that the Slovakian government would not directly supply lethal weapons to Kiev, with the exemption of simply allowing commercial contracts. Joining us on the broadcast is Mr. David K. Johnson. Interesting developments as far as Slovakia is concerned, because we have seen that they are trying to bolster their own air defense capabilities along the Eastern Front. They've acquired systems from Israel. They've bought F-16 fighter jets from the Americans. They've also, in fact, agreed on the need for a drone wall back in September. So on one hand, they are in agreement with the larger security apparatus, but on the other, as far as their energy needs are concerned, they have drawn the red line. If Slovakia is considering suing the EU over the latter's plans to halt Russian gas supplies from 2028, what sort of mechanism do you think is available for them to do so, and how could they go about doing that?
Well, how they would pursue this legally is a question I can't answer for you, and I don't think that the government can either. But it's important to note that before the Russian invasions, Prime Minister Robert Fico's country was counting on the Russians for 85% of their natural gas. They're now down to only about a third of their natural gas. So by 2028, they should be able to pivot away from the natural gas coming through what's called the Turk Stream pipeline from Russia. And it's important to note that Fico has made himself into an asset of the Kremlin. He went to their 80th victory celebration of the defeat of the Nazis. He has spoken favorably again and again about Vladimir Putin. So I suspect this is more an effort to probe whether there are wedges that can be driven among EU nations and Western European nations to help the Kremlin advance its fundamental goal of expanding its control of Eastern Europe.
Indeed, sir. On that note, I request you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates. Now, the European Commission has announced plans to reduce the number of cookie consent banners shown to users while maintaining data privacy. Under the proposed changes, users would be able to indicate consent with a single click and save preferences through browser or operating system settings, streamlining the current process. Now, in a separate measure, the EU has also proposed giving companies more time to comply with rules on high-risk artificial intelligence. Now, originally set to take effect in August 2026, the deadline for compliance with EU's AI regulations, which entered into force last year, would now be extended to December 2027. This is the latest coming in on the tech front. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. David K. Johnson. Interesting development as far as reducing cookie consent banners through browser-level preferences are concerned. There's, of course, we've seen a tussle between the EU and the big tech as of late over the last couple of years. What sort of message is the EU trying to send by laying down these guidelines, and as far as its stringent data protection standards are concerned?
Well, this goes to one of the important things I teach my students at Rochester Institute of Technology, my law students. In Europe, human rights, and that includes consumer rights, grow out of the concept of human dignity. In America, they grow out of property rights. So you get very different rules. And the Europeans have been much better than the Americans about big tech, on gathering information, on turning the customer into the source of information they resell. In America, this problem of pop-up banners is completely out of control. A number of websites are virtually unreadable, and some publishers are beginning to recognize that if people can't read their content, then the ads are of no use whatsoever. So what they're trying to do here in the EU is take a situation that's not as bad as in America, but it's pretty bad from my last visit to Europe, and reduce the amount of just things flowing up on your screen and saying, you know, look at this, buy this product. And one click is probably the simplest, best answer. It was the EU, after all, that led the charge on saying we're going to use one uniform set of plugs instead of every new device having its own separate plug, which is incredibly wasteful to the environment and incredibly expensive to consumers. And hopefully the EU will adopt rules that are more friendly to consumers. And big tech, of course, counts on all of these automated banners where there's no workers involved to earn the kind of outsized profits, supranormal profits, as economists say, that they have come to expect and regard as a right.
Indeed, as you've mentioned, this stems out of human dignity. It's likely to, in fact, reduce user fatigue because while browsing through different sites, one often gets tired just seeing these cookie banners pop up repeatedly. But as far as streamlining cookie consent is and its impact on business models is concerned, how can then we see the advertisers sort of respond to this?
Well, advertisers, I think, should be right now taking a hard look at, are you in fact acquiring customers and bringing in revenue? Or are you annoying people and driving them away? And targeting has always been a problem. You know, most people don't see your ad. In the pre-internet era, however, where you had fewer outlets, fewer publications or broadcast stations, you threw something out there and then you tested the responses that you got. A lot of what you're seeing now seems very scattergun approach, not at all focused, highly inefficient. And why? Well, because the rates being paid to throw these annoying cookie banners out there that explode on your screen is incredibly low. So some adjustment to make price be an information point would be a big benefit to consumers. Mm-hmm. And it could be a benefit to the companies if it reduces annoyance. And I know there are a couple of companies I don't want to hear about them anymore because they keep, in my view, invading my experience on the internet.
All right, sir, with that, I would like to thank you for sharing your perspective on this interesting development. On that note, viewers, we're shifting focus to what's taking place in Turkey. We're now learning that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is meeting with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara, where the two leaders will discuss strategies for securing a just peace in the ongoing conflict. During the meeting, Zelensky has stated that Ukraine hopes to revive the prisoner of war exchanges with Russia by the year end. During the trip, the Ukrainian leader also paid tribute to Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, Turkey's first president, at the Anıtkabir Mausoleum. One of the key aspects of his visit is to seek Turkey's support in reviving the involvement of the United States in efforts to end the ongoing war. Meanwhile, talks are being closely followed. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will not be attending the meeting, as confirmed by a senior U.S. State Department official. The official denied reports suggesting Witkoff's participation in the discussions, emphasizing that the envoy's absence from these talks is accurate. Meanwhile, the president of the Louvre Museum, Laurence Decars, has testified before France's National Assembly in a session focused on cultural governance, transparency and the preservation of natural heritage. During the hearing, the museum chief addressed questions related to funding, security measures and the management of one of the world's most visited cultural institutions. Lawmakers have pressed for clarity on the ongoing restoration projects, the protection of artworks amid rising global scrutiny, concerns as well as the museum's role in promoting access to art for the general public. The testimony has also touched on broader issues affecting French museums, including digitization efforts, international loans of artworks and strategies to maintain attendance following post-pandemic fluctuations. We do know that the Louvre had made headlines after a robbery was reported where the French crown jewels were stolen. Well, viewers, due to paucity of time, it's a wrap on the World Report. We will continue to track these updates very, very shortly. On that note, a quick short break.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for...
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the Africa Brief on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. President Donald Trump says he will work to help end the war in Sudan after Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman asked him to intervene. Trump says his administration began efforts within half an hour of their meeting at the White House. Sudan's army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan says he is ready to work with the United States and Saudi Arabia on efforts to end the conflict. His council thanks regional mediators and says it will seriously engage in pursuit of a lasting peace. South Africa deploys more than 3,500 police officers and places the army on standby ahead of expected protests at this weekend's G20 summit in Johannesburg. Authorities stage a show of force with helicopters and motorcycle units as part of their high-level security operation. Gunmen storm a church in Kwara State in Nigeria, killing two people and kidnapping the pastor and several worshippers. The attack comes days after a mass abduction of schoolgirls amid growing pressure on Nigeria from President Donald Trump over Christian persecution. China's premier makes a landmark trip to Zambia as Beijing and the West compete for influence in Africa's investment landscape. The visit focuses on trade, infrastructure, and expanding long-term economic ties. Now in the US, President Donald Trump says he has signed a bill requiring the release of government documents on Jeffrey Epstein. Trump, who had earlier opposed the measure, announces on Truth Social that he has just signed the bill. The European Union is expected to sanction the Deputy Chief Commander of the Rapid Support Forces in Sudan. EU foreign ministers are expected to approve the sanctions today. Now, our top story of the day. President Donald Trump says he has signed a bill requiring his administration to release government-held documents related to the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Trump, who had initially opposed the measure, reversed course as the legislation gained momentum in Congress. He announced the signing on his Truth Social platform, declaring he had just signed the bill to release the Epstein files. The move follows comments from US Attorney General Pam Bondi, who vowed maximum transparency after both chambers of Congress, now under Republican control, voted to mandate the release. Bondi confirmed the Justice Department will publish its Epstein-related materials within 30 days, as the law requires. The release is expected to shed new light on Epstein's activities before and after his 2008 conviction. Joining us now is Shruti Dasgupta. She is an international affairs expert and she joins us live from New Delhi. Shruti, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Shruti, Trump has forced now the full release of the Epstein files, a complete U-turn to his previous stance and cause of much controversy. What does this tell you about the political calculation behind such a move, and why now?
Well, we've discussed this, I think, in our last conversation, Thomas, where I said that there is a clause to it where it says until and unless a particular information of the Epstein files is going to hinder an ongoing investigation, in that case, the Department of Justice under Pam Bondi can withhold that particular section of the files as legally, bindingly, or legally hold back from the public scrutiny. So passing in both House and Senate, signing by Trump is just political gimmick as of now, until and unless an uninterrupted flow of information is given to the American people in the name of Epstein files. These clauses will continue to protect those that Trump wants to protect and will continue to help the administration hold political currency over people who are probably indicted in those files in a very unsavory light, but want to use their influence with Trump to keep it quiet. So there is a large gray zone in which people don't realize when the files are actually released in total, without a single redaction, without a single piece of the puzzle missing, is when I would truly believe that there was transparency and accountability behind the signing of this bill. I highly doubt as of now that all of it will be released, maybe a small parcel of it, maybe the parcel that would implicate Democrats more than the Republicans, but I do not think that there will be a full transparency with the release and the signing of this particular bill.
Yes, and of course, do you expect the effects to ripple beyond the US, especially, of course, in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, where many high-profile names have appeared in the sphere of influence of Jeffrey Epstein?
You're completely right, because there were emails that were shared by Democrats, I think in the past week or so, where there were names of diplomats from various countries attending to parties. Now, what kind of parties is a different question. Those emails just spoke about being invited to particular events, or that particular section of people there for a particular event also being hosted by Epstein. But there are different versions of Epstein's parties. Some of them are purely political, rubbing shoulders, and then there are those where the activities that are not completely on the gray line, on the right side of the moral equation, and then there are some that are completely illegal. So which parties were the ones where the people were, transacting in flesh trade, were interacting with minors? That is something that would be very, very controversial. The reason why both the Republicans and the Democrats earlier had wanted to sit on this landmine was because the ripples would not just resonate throughout America. It will affect every single world leader or diplomat. So the circles are going to be very edgy to see exactly which names are going to be withheld and which names are going to come out, and who actually the Trump regime under Pam Bondi is going to protect under the Department of Justice and its gray zone.
Do you think this is enough to politically benefit Donald Trump at this stage, whether he's mentioned in the files or not? Or do you think the damage has already been done, Shruti?
See, he did take a little bit of hit. A lot of MAGA voters were unhappy that he championed the cause of full transparency, but backed out once he came into power. So that did impact it a little. Until and unless now the released files are completely unredacted, those people will continue to suspect Trump of some tomfoolery and some hot stepping around the actual issue where his names are involved. So whether the redacted portions are actually implicating Trump or a leader that he wants to protect, or his own political currency in terms of social blackmail or political blackmail, any of the redacted portions is going to look like as if Trump was part of that particular party or Trump was part of that particular thing that we are unable to see. So he has taken his reputation within his MAGA voter bank has taken a hit in terms of transparency with this issue. Now, with the signing, he's trying to regain it. Some of them will fall for it, and some of them will continue to sit on the fence and watch how the files are released and who or which names are being named.
Yes, Shruti, do stay with us as we have further updates. But of course, moving over to the African region next, and activists have illuminated Johannesburg's skyline with projections demanding urgent reforms to address the global debt crisis and calls for climate accountability as G20 leaders are set to gather for the first summit on African soil. Sedokethlane Famodi, the director of the New Economy Hub, has criticised current global lending systems, saying that African nations now spend more on debt servicing than on public health care, with 25 allocating more to the debt than education. Let's take a listen in.
We are here tonight to project this message to the G20 leaders and their retinues who have come from all over the world to really bring a focus to the debt crisis that is facing the majority world and especially African countries. African countries are really good payers. They are really consistent in paying their debts to the extent that they deny their people, their nations, the basics of life in order to be able to service their debt costs. And yet defaulting countries in Europe have their interest costs priced at a much cheaper rate. If anything, this is another kind of imperialism.
The rally comes as civil society groups urge South African President Cyril Ramaphosa to champion the debt cancellation agenda at the G20. An open letter signed by 160 organisations stressed the need for bold leadership in addressing debt burdens. While praising South Africa's advocacy for reforms, activists have called for courage from wealthier nations to implement systemic change. Joining us once again is Shruti Dasgupta, and also Andrew K.P. Leung joins us. He's a China strategist and he joins us live from Hong Kong. Andrew, I wanted to start with you. Many African nations argue that they're trapped between Western leaders and Chinese creditors. Does the G20 have any real ability to break this deadlock?
Well, let's put this debt problem in some sort of a historical context. It's not the first time that African nations facing the debt crisis. Let's trace back to about 20 or 30 years ago. The same sort of thing happened, resulting in sort of debt relief and calling for more aid, in other words, interest free, either loans or gifts. But it didn't work because the money didn't solve the problem of poverty because what drives the economy is the capacity of the people to build their own lives, to build their own, create their own jobs, to grow the economy, and to attain a degree of self-reliance and sustainability, not just on the climate sense, but in the sustainability of the economy, rather than relying on debt. So it is another carrying call for a kind of development model for struggling nations in the Global South in particular. And of course, a number of countries in the Global South have actuated from the debt crisis. We look at some of the countries in Asia or even in Latin America. But it also points to the fact that people need to be educated in the skills. There ought to be more schools. There ought to be more infrastructure, roads, highways. So I think that this is a carrying call. And then in this context, China plays a very important role because China model is very different from the West. The West engagement with Africa is also based on the bottom line, using the so-called IMF model. Everything needs to be changed to create the market. But the market, if you look at some of the countries in Africa, they're growing coffee, they're growing soybeans, Where's the money gone? The money has go to large multinationals.
Yes.
And so the benefits don't trickle down. Whereas the people at the bottom, they lack skills, they lack education, they lack healthcare. I think that this is more important dynamics involved than just debt relief.
Okay, Shruti, I wanted to bring you in here. Is this a sign of rising global South frustration with the current international financial architecture?
Absolutely right, because the Western inclined architecture of money lending is harming the nations that are actually contributing the most to the world's GDP. And there is about 60% of the world's population, 75% of the global trade, and all of this is being represented at G20, out of which as of now the West represents very little in terms of both population as well as GDP. But the rules are inclined towards them very positively, whereas the African nations, who have suffered a whole lot under both the colonial rules as well as the internal civil wars that were incited by some external force or internal force, they continue to face problems, civil problems inside their own societies. How do they grow until and unless the nations that are supposed to be richer than them, they are give them a helping hand. They ensure that these places are places of where humanity itself will find a new hope. And that is something which is definitely lacking in terms of policy as far as money lending to these economies is concerned. If they are left to service their debts year after year, and there are defaulters that are given lower rates, more extensions and more loans. My home nation's neighbor, Pakistan, being a prime example of that. They're given good, like sinking back, good money after bad in certain economies because it suits your political purpose. Then it looks very bad for the world in general. So IMF needs to rethink its policies towards African nations, as well as the Western nations need to think about how they look at African nations, not as a liability, but as a potential where growth of humanity, industry, as well as general world power can be effective.
Okay, Shruti Dasgupta, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to have you on the programme. Andrew, do stay with us as we have further updates to discuss. Now, Zambia has welcomed Chinese Premier Li Qiang to Lusaka, marking the first visit by a Chinese premier in 28 years. The trip comes as the copper-rich nation emerges from a prolonged financial crisis and works to stabilise its economy under a new, more sustainable debt repayment plan. China remains Zambia's largest official creditor with $5.7 billion owed, and Beijing is keen to showcase Zambia as a model participant in President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese officials have framed the visit as an example of how African nations can recover from financial distress with China's support. As Zambia pushes to industrialize, it is seeking fresh investment in mining, infrastructure and production capacity. China, for its part, is looking to expand exports of tractors, electrical equipment and construction vehicles into the Zambian market. Despite recent economic turbulence, the outlook is brightening. The World Bank projects that Zambia's economy will grow by 6.5% next year, outpacing its average growth of around 5% over the past 2 decades. Joining us once again is Andrew K.P. Liang. He joins us to speak about this. Andrew, of course, China remains Zambia's largest official creditor with $5.7 billion owed. Is that expected back by Beijing? And what is the time frame under this Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, of course, China's engagement with Africa is not just depending on country to country. It's also supported by a very powerful platform called the China-African Cooperation Framework or Convention, which meets every couple of years to review the roadmap ahead for the development of the individual member African countries, and also linking together with China's investment, China's aid program, China's technology training program. The whole idea is to ensure that there is a sustainable path for the various backward African countries, how to rise from poverty, how to address their incapacity and their total dependence on foreign aid, to build up their resilience, relying on their huge resources. Let's not forget that Africa is the world's remaining pasture for arable land. But a lot of land is out of nowhere. They're not connected by roads, highways, bridges, ports, let alone the lack of hospitals, schools for the children. So, and all this lack of capacity, of infrastructure, of connectivity with the outside world translates into a downward spiral towards poverty and dependence. I think that these challenges China has been grasping, together with the older models, some of blowback against China's engagement in terms of lack of transparency in some of the projects, the lack of attention to the local environment, the lack of involvement with the local stakeholders. So I think the Modern Belt and Road Initiative has now been revised and rejigged to focus on more smaller projects, focusing on the ecology, focusing on sustainability, including debt sustainability, because a lot of debt in the past was given to just to the demands of the local governments, without realizing, without analyzing in depth how sustainable these debts are, rather than just jack up the debt numbers. So I think that it's not just debt, it's the sustainability, it's capacity building, and also you could throw in the ecology, climate change. A lot of the poor countries, they struggle to cope with the ravages of more acute weather conditions, more drought, and then they don't have the money to build the capacity. And then that also impact on their development trajectory. So all these problems are going to be addressed in the forum in Africa.
Yes, Andrew K.P. Leung, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Always a pleasure to get your insight. We now move on, and Germany has formally returned a collection of 12 cultural artefacts to Ethiopia, marking a significant step in ongoing global efforts to repatriate African heritage. The ceremony, held at Addis Ababa University's Ras Mekonnen Hall, brought together Ethiopian officials, diplomats and scholars. The items, among them shields, crowns and traditional paintings, were originally brought to Germany in the 1920s by diplomat Fritz Weiss. His grandson, Professor Raymond Weiss, personally handed the collection over to Dr. Johann Egede's Institute of Ethiopian Studies. The German embassy coordinated the return alongside the institute, calling it an important gesture of cultural partnership. The move comes as museums and governments worldwide face increasing pressure to return artifacts taken during colonial-era missions. An accompanying exhibition, more than 50 photographs from the Weiss family archive, is set to open at the Goethe Institute, offering rare glimpses into the Ethiopia of the 1920s. Now we move on, and Nigerian security armed forces are still searching for 24 schoolgirls abducted by unidentified armed men from a secondary school in the northwestern town of Maga in Kebbi State. Authorities have said that one of the girls managed to escape, but the school's vice principal was killed. Meanwhile, in a separate attack on a church in western Nigeria, gunmen killed 2 people during a service that was recorded and broadcasted online. Both the church attack and girls' abduction come after US President Donald Trump earlier this month threatened military action over what he described as the killing of Nigeria's Christians, a narrative rejected by the Nigerian government. And that's a wrap on the Africa Brief. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Trending Tech on here, NewsX World, where we bring you the latest trends, gadgets and tech breakthroughs from around the globe. Cyber attacks on governments have become a growing and sophisticated threat, driven by geopolitical tensions, espionage and financial motives. A recent report by Microsoft suggested that Russia has increased cyber attacks against NATO states by 25% in the past year. The most targeted sector has been government, with the United States, the UK and Ukraine among the top victims. This rise in cyber activity is what the European Union calls Russia's hybrid warfare strategy, which includes a range of unconventional tactics such as cyber attacks, drone incursions and intelligence operations. Amid this, experts now warn that these cyber activities are pushing the boundaries of what can be considered warfare in the digital age. To talk about this ongoing issue is Kaptilov Arseny. He is the CEO and co-founder of water treatment engineering company Aquarime LLC and ambassador for peace in the Universal Peace Foundation. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you. Let's get straight into it.
Yeah, colleagues, nice to meet you here.
Great for you to be with us. What exactly constitutes a cyber attack, and how does it differ from other types of digital threats?
It's a very actual topic now, so let's have a little conversation about it. I think it's great nowadays we can still talk all over the world about problems and real situation in the world. About cyber attacks. Cyber attacks in digital world now is, I think, the most important problem we have, because all our data of common people, government, of technological data and influence on this infrastructure is under attack now. Because cyber attack is hacking, encryption, destabilizing system of whole countries maybe. Sometimes it's about companies, sometimes it's about banking system, and it's very scary nowadays. Maybe 10 or 15, 20 years ago, we watched this situation in movies and think without, oh, it would never happen. It's maybe thousands and thousands years further, but now we can see that we are living in this age. So it's very, very important problem now. And with the whole world, we need to understand how to solve it and to work with it.
Yes, and why are governments and organizations so vulnerable to these cyber attacks? And of course, what can be done to improve their defenses?
The main reason, of course, for government is to protect itself, information, data, infrastructure. And from another side, of course, as we know from books, that the best protection is attack. So the second part of this war is about to get data from other countries and get access to influence their infrastructure, include banking, generation, etc. The main problem now is that maybe 10 years ago, this situation with data was not so wide. It's new business, it's new system. Maybe 10 years ago, IT was not popular, and now we see that all infrastructure is based in old-fashioned and very old system. And for government, it's very difficult to hire advanced specialists with their salaries to invest a lot of money, huge amount of money to protect the system of whole country. Imagine, we hear every day that in some little companies is problems with hacking, with the loss of data of its clients, but it's little company, and to protect it, it's very simple. But if we see that these companies have a problem, imagine, country, government, it's great aim for attacking, for finding loopholes in systems, and now governments need to invest billions, trillions of dollars to protect it. And now that's the main problem. They don't have money from one side. They can't afford to hire best specialists from another side, because all huge companies in the world, like, I don't know, Apple, Microsoft, Google, are interested in such specialists. And you can't go to labor market and say, guys, hello, please come to us. No, you can't find them. So that's the main reason about this situation with loopholes in government systems.
Yeah, and Kaptilov, we've seen an increase in these state-sanctioned cyber attacks, of course, in recent years. What do these attacks play in geopolitical strategy and international relations?
As usual, as 20, 30 years ago, spies tried to find information, collect it, and know mind of enemies, plans of enemies. Now the same is cyber espionage. You need to have access to diplomatic, military, economical information. You need to have information for sabotage or show forces, attacks on public services, infrastructure, and etc. Pressure on assets, and make some bullshit information for people and the nation. That situation is opposite. Now we live in a time of fakes, and who own real information rules the world. It's the simple thing. So that's the reason all governments now are interested in develop cyber attacks to their enemies, sometimes to their partners, because information from partners is maybe very important too. Today you are friend, tomorrow you are enemy. So,
yeah, and do you think major cyber attacks are effectively now an act of war? And do you think countries should start treating them as such?
I think the situation is very interesting now, because now countries are playing in hybrid warfare. So we can see that, for example, America is playing a lot of games, a lot of conflicts, real conflicts, offline conflicts, let's name them this type, all over the world. But from another side, in shadow zones like cyber, a lot of acts too. So this is hybrid warfare. Now countries don't operate only with offline or online separated. Now everyone operated with complicated systems. You can see now in a war between Russia and Ukraine, a lot of drones are using with artificial intelligence. So, and you see that protect from them is very difficult. But if you ruin IT infrastructure of your enemy can't operate its own drones, but you can.
Yeah.
And this muscle, you can change the war in one button. And it's very, very scary now, because all military, all resources now is based on IT. So that reason to protect it, it's the first idea now. It's not so easy to grab tank, steal tank, or to steal jet fight, but it's simple to steal information, to steal influence, and to steal control on IT infrastructure. And now your drones become your enemy's drones.
Yeah, and Kaptilov, of course, it's important not to speculate, and of course, this is an extreme example. But what is the worst case scenario when it comes to a cyber attack? For example, could one single coordinated attack shut down a country's entire infrastructure, for example?
Yes, it's the main aim. If you can shut down the country infrastructure, for example, imagine you live in India, Russia, America, and you wake up and you can't use your bank accounts, can't use your bank application. You can't use your cable TV. A lot of cars now are with IT inside it, with soft inside it. You can't use them. You can't turn on your electricity in your flat or to cook your sandwich in the morning. No victims, no real victims. Nobody is killed, but you are scary. It's disaster. And this disaster can be realized only with one button, from one man like you, me, or others sitting in the front of computer and can do it. That's nowadays IT specialists are so well paid and important guys.
Yeah, and finally, do you think, of course, the world has nuclear non-proliferation treaties, organizations like the United Nations? Do you think it's time that the world develops something similar, but for cyber warfare instead?
I hope that really governments all over the world will think about it and will seriously come to these tasks, because our world is very big and there are enough resources for everyone. And from my point of view, it's my personal opinion, the whole world can live in peace and think about more strategic ideas. For example, how to win above cancer, or about other sickness and illness we can't, or about how to people live longer or happy life. So I hope that government will sit on the table and during negotiations decide to create a real instrument, organization, or something like it, to protect common people from all these problems and all this disaster with IT infrastructure. Because developing it, it's very good, but sustainability, and I think everyone understands that sustainability of each system is very important. You can't create everything. Let's remember Babylon Tower. It was a great example because it was sustainable. Once everyone started to talk different languages, and this project was ruined.
Yes. Yeah.
So now we can see the same. If sustainability of all this modern system won't be achieved, we can see, I'm afraid of it, that we can see a ruined world. And I hope that big smart guys in governments, presidents, heads of corporations really will sit during negotiations and find solution to protect world from these disasters. Really.
Well, Kapitolov Arseny, thank you very much for joining us on Focal Length. Well, that's all we have time for here on Trending Tech. Thank you very much for joining us here on the programme, and stay tuned on NewsX World for more international updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
what we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things. And
welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. Thousands of people, primarily members of Generation Z, are marching in major Mexican cities to protest against widespread crime, corruption and government impunity. The demonstrations, which were partly sparked by the recent assassination of an anti-crime mayor, resulted in clashes with police in Mexico City, injuring at least 120 people. Now, to talk about this, joining us is Alex Gonzalez Umarod. He is the editor-in-chief of the Mexico Political Economist. He's also edited and written for publications including White Paper, Rest of World, America's Quarterly, Hyperallergenic, Nexos, and more. He also consults widely on political and economic matters across Latin America. Today, he will be discussing the latest developments in Mexican politics, the economic implications of recent policy decisions, the regional political trends in Latin America, and their impact on global business. Thank you very much for joining us, Alex Gonzalez Umarod. Let's get straight into it. My first question to you is, what is driving the recent wave of Gen Z-led protests across Mexico, and how are authorities responding to this new generation of politically engaged youth?
So those are two different questions. The first answer is there are two main motivations behind the protests. The number one is the perfectly legitimate anger at what is going on in Mexico, the violence and the lack of security that has been going on for decades now. The other half is, of course, the fact that there is clearly a force behind the scenes that is pushing for this sort of protest. And this will answer your second question, which is that ultimately, I'm not quite sure that this is a Gen Z protest. There are a few young people, but you look at the demographics of the people actually marching, and they are by far boomers, older people, people who aren't actually Gen Z. You see the way the communication is done, how it's done. I think ultimately what you can conclude is this wasn't a protest by politically engaged youth. This is actually more clearly a protest by organizers who haven't quite revealed themselves. I don't know if there's anything too sinister. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that the opposition in Mexico is very discredited. And so it often mobilizes in a covert way so as not to show its true colors.
Yes, and Alex, following on from that, another leading story coming out of Mexico, of course, would be the recent harassment incident involving President Sheinbaum. And what does that incident reveal about broader security lapses and the polarized political climate in Mexico right now?
It's a disgrace for many reasons, of course. The sexual harassment of the president is not only disgusting because of the fact that it is the sexual harassment of a woman, any woman. It is the president of Mexico who should have had a far more stringent security contingent, literally hours after the brutal murder of a very popular mayor in a different state. You have this man coming up from behind her and groping her. Completely unacceptable, both in moral terms, but also in terms of her security unit.
Yes, and of course we've mentioned about the killing of this mayor in Mexico. How does this incident speak of the law and order situation in the country?
Mexico is a very big country with a very complex system of security apparatuses, cartel relationships. And so when we talk about Mexico, we're actually talking about a series of different places. A really tragic stat that I like to tell people is that 50% of all the brutal violence going on in Mexico is concentrated in just a tiny handful of Mexico's 2,000 municipalities, which on one side means there are places like the Yucatan Peninsula, which are safer than Canada. You've got Mexico City, which is safer than New York or Washington, D.C. But then you've got places like Michoacán, Uruapan, where the mayor was killed, where there is violence unlike anywhere else in the world that we've seen. And so that's the enormous complexity about Mexico. Loads of violence concentrated in very, very specific places.
It's very interesting, and the United Nations has, of course, rated Mexico as one of the most violent countries for women in the world. We have seen many Mexican women now demanding access to women-only taxis and rideshare services. And what does this say about the current state of their safety? What is the government doing to combat this also?
Mexico, again, is a very polarized place when it comes to this. Obviously, feminicides are rampant, and they have been classified as such by the government. But there are also lots of interesting solutions going on across the country. Mexico is one of the few places in the world that has pretty much complete gender parity in politics. So more than 50% of the Congress is women, more than 50% of the judiciary is women, our president is a woman, and yet, to a great extent, that underscores the terrible plight of women, that even in these conditions where women are represented fairly in politics, even then they're under enormous threat in Mexico.
Let's now move on to the country's relationship with the broader continent. How does Mexico's internal challenges within the broader political and social shifts happening across Latin America, from economic instability to rising authoritarianism tendencies?
Mexico's an interesting place because it's bucked a lot of trends recently. As the rest of the world moves to the right, Mexico's left-wing government has consolidated. That worries a lot of people because they see the consolidation of a massive party, sort of reminiscent to India's Congress Party. That worries a lot of people because they say it'll become overbearing, authoritarian, and repress the rest of the opposition. The issue to me is they've won it so far relatively fair and square. It's after years of right-wing misgovernment of Mexico that the left-wing government was introduced into Mexico by democratic mandate on a massive scale. President Sheinbaum, even though her ratings have gone down since this violence, is still an enormously popular president who can mobilize enormous forces to her. The issue is, I think, on the opposition side, a lot of the claims about dictatorship and authoritarianism actually come from the ineptitude of the opposition, which is not able to capitalize on a lot of the legitimate anger in Mexico properly. You can see it through how they've tried to jump onto these protests. So they say they're completely nonpartisan, and yet I only see partisan and party political representatives talking about it on the television. And so to me, that represents the fundamental issue of Mexico's opposition. It has a lot of people it can and should work with, and yet it is completely unable to, through corruption, through the fact that they've been destroyed at the polling booths, and they're still sort of recuperating.
Now, given current tensions over migration, trade and fentanyl trafficking, how would you characterize the state of US-Mexico relations today and where they are likely headed in 2025 under Sheinbaum's leadership?
The state of US-Mexico relations at the moment is surprisingly good. When it comes to security, it's sort of shocking because you see US Secretary of State Marco Rubio coming to Mexico, and he is famously a very hard man when it comes to representing America's interests. And he came to Mexico to say that bar none, Mexico is the best partner they have when it comes to security. So Mexico and the US are working very, very closely because they have a common enemy, which is organized crime. So on that front, I think we have a lot of positive work going on, a lot of intelligence sharing, and beyond the posturing, a lot of collaboration. The issue comes when it comes to trade. Trade is a big issue for the United States because it is woken up to the fact that China is nipping at its heels, not only in cheap imports, but also in high technology. So they're having to reconfigure. I think at first they thought from the United States that they could basically isolate and do an America first and an only America vision of manufacturing and commerce and services. They've realized that they don't have enough people or the capacity to do that, especially not in the short term. And so that's where Mexico comes in. Mexico is essential to the United States, not only because we send them most of their products when it comes to manufacturers, when it comes to agricultural services, etc., but also in terms of security. The United States can't keep up with China's pace unless it's working alongside Mexico, which doesn't just provide cheap labor, which is the sort of classic excuse that people use, but rather specialized labor that Americans are simply not doing anymore. And so a lot of the US auto manufacturing sector depends on Mexico's, for example. It's not that you could get rid of Mexico, cut off Mexico, and then suddenly have a thriving US auto manufacturers sector. You'd actually get the opposite. You'd hurt them. And so I think that's what President Trump has started to realize slowly but surely, as he realizes how deeply integrated Mexico and the United States are. It's an issue he wants to deal with. He thinks some things are unfair, but I think he's come to realize that Mexico is a net asset for the US, not a problem.
Alex Gonzalez or Merod, thank you very much for joining us here on Focal Length. A fascinating conversation about a fascinating country. But with that, it's a wrap on this episode of Focal Length. For more international news updates, stay tuned on NewsX World. Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. US President Donald Trump says he has signed a bill requiring the release of government documents on Jeffrey Epstein. Trump, who had earlier opposed the measure, announces on Truth Social that he has just signed the bill. Senior Pentagon officials, led by Army Secretary Dan Briscoe, arrive in Kyiv to meet President Zelensky and discuss efforts to end the war with Russia. The visit comes as reports emerge of a new peace plan and after a Russian strike kills 26 people in Ternopil. Ukraine says at least 26 people are killed and dozens are missing after Russian drones and missile strikes hit apartment blocks in the Ukrainian city of Ternopil. Officials say nearly 100 are injured as Russia launches hundreds of drones and missiles, damaging energy and transport sites. A Philippine court sentences former Mayor Alice Guo to life imprisonment after finding her guilty of human trafficking. Authorities say Guo, later identified as a Chinese national, ran for office under false Filipino identity. Sudan's army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan says his council is ready to work with the United States and Saudi Arabia to help end the conflict. The statement thanks regional mediators and follows President Trump's pledge to coordinate efforts with Gulf states to stop the fighting. The Israeli military says Hezbollah is violating a ceasefire by rebuilding operations in southern Lebanon near the Israeli border. It says dozens of sites, including headquarters and weapons stores in civilian homes, have been identified around the village of Beit Leaf. Hamas condemns new Israeli airstrikes in Gaza as a dangerous escalation, warning they threaten an already fragile ceasefire. Israel says the strikes respond to a Hamas violation, while medics report at least 25 people killed in the last 24 hours. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meets members of Congress in Washington as he promotes deepening economic and security ties. The visit follows a lavish White House welcome from President Trump, who again defends him over the 2018 Khashoggi killing. Those are the headlines of the hour, and we start this bulletin in the Indo-Pacific. And Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te has signalled support for Japan as regional tensions in East Asia continue to rise. Earlier today, he shared images of himself having a sushi lunch made with Japanese yellowtail from Kagoshima and scallops from Hokkaido. This social media display comes amid growing friction between Tokyo and Beijing. Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, has recently remarked that any attack on Taiwan can threaten Japan's security and could lead to a military response. China later indicated it may ban Japanese seafood imports in its ongoing dispute over Taiwan. Moreover, the Taiwanese government has faced similar import bans from China in recent years, targeting products such as pineapples and fish. Taipei has characterized these actions as part of a broader pressure campaign. Meanwhile, at a briefing in Beijing, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has reiterated its position that Taiwan is part of China and said that it remains a non-negotiable stance. Following this ongoing tension between China and Taiwan, Taiwan's leadership has called for stronger support for Japan, including more travel and increased purchases of Japanese goods. Officials have said that such actions would help demonstrate friendship between the two sides. Joining us now is Dmytro Burstev. He's a junior research fellow at the Institute of Oriental Studies in Ukraine, joining us from Taipei. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It is a pleasure to have you. Dmytro, a sushi lunch with Japan's envoy, a clear, deliberate public gesture here. What exactly is Taiwan signaling to both Beijing and Japan with this move?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that Taiwan sees Japan as the first ally who actually gonna help them in case of any conflict, and actually situation with Chinese-Japanese relations and the friction in relations gives Taipei a chance to become closer to Japan, actually. Pretty good chance, actually.
Yes, and of course, China now says that trade cooperation with Japan has been severely hit, with China also floating the banning of Japanese seafood imports over to Beijing. Is Beijing using the same economic coercion playbook as, for example, in South Korea in 2017?
Yes, especially China will use all the tools to press Japan. So banning the seafood is one of the tools, and we can see that, well, Chinese also proclaim that they don't want Chinese citizens go to Japan for traveling, so it's another tool of influence which can be also very pressing for Japan. And even as the Chinese airlines, they claim that they will cancel the flights for Chinese who already booked the flights without any fees, additional fees, and return the money.
Yes, and Dmytro, of course, it has been just a few weeks since the APEC summit, where we saw the new Japanese Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, shake hands with Chinese President Xi Jinping. A lot has obviously happened since then, with these tensions seem to be escalating on a daily basis. How do you see this situation playing out?
Well, at the same time, Japanese Prime Minister also met with Taiwanese representative in ASEAN Forum. So it's also a very important sign that Japan isn't interested in stable Taiwan. So I suppose these frictions will be over like within 3-4 weeks, but because nobody interested in sharpening the situation at the moment. However, I think escalation might continue even longer.
Okay, Dimitro, do stay with us as we have further updates from, of course, this developing situation. And ties between Japan and China have deteriorated further after recent comments by Japan's new Prime Minister on a potential security threat from ongoing China-Taiwan conflicts. China has said that its trade cooperation with Japan has suffered a significant setback since those remarks were made. According to the Chinese Commerce Ministry, Japan's position has damaged their bilateral engagement, further adding that Beijing could take extra measures if Tokyo continues to maintain the same stance. In the past week, China has said that Japan's seafood import procedures were insufficient, signaling that a full ban could be implemented within months. Beijing has also halted talks on resuming Japanese beef imports and threatened further action unless Tokyo reversed its position. The issue of Taiwan remains a central point of contention as China maintains its claim over the island, while Japan continues to monitor regional security developments very closely. Dimitro joins us once again. Dimitro, of course, partners in East Asia now seeming to deteriorate. Tensions between the two countries historically troubling. However, now it seems that things are deteriorating to a very bad level when it comes to trade. Can, of course, who will suffer more greatly here, China or Japan, when it comes to the prohibition of exports to both countries if it is to continue?
I suppose Japan is in a more vulnerable position in this case because of the size of economics and actually specific branches of industries which are export related for Japan and ties with China. And actually, it's not the first time this the friction happened in relations between China and Japan, but it seems like the frictions right now are the most severe within the last decade.
Okay, Dimitro Burstev, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you on the program. We now move over to West Asia for our next story, and Israel has launched new airstrikes on Gaza early this morning as both sides accused each other of violating the ceasefire that came into effect on October the 10th. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency says 3 people were killed and 15 others were injured after a residential building was hit in the Bani Shwela area of eastern Khan Yunis at around 4 a.m. local time. Authorities say the strikes stopped after 5 a.m, but reports of ongoing artillery fire continue from the Khan Yunis region. The Israeli military is yet to comment on the strikes, however. Humanitarian agencies are closely monitoring developments as civilians in the area continue to face severe risk. Joining us now here on the programme is Sander van Hoorn, a former EU correspondent, and he joins us live from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World, Sander. Pleasure to have you. Israel says that 3 people have been killed in these new recent strikes. This, of course, follows over 20 killed yesterday. What's triggering this violence, and what effects does it have on this already fragile ceasefire in place in the Gaza enclave?
It all started, according to Israel, when 3 of its troops were attacked allegedly by Hamas. Hamas denies they attacked Israeli troops, but that sparked this current flare-up of violence. And most recent figures provided by the Hamas-run Ministry of Health in Gaza point to over 30 people killed so far. And Hamas is blaming Israel for violating the ceasefire. Now, the second part of your question, the fragility of this ceasefire, it holds as long as both parties still say it holds and don't say it doesn't. So for now, both parties say they will stick to the ceasefire. We've seen flare-ups in the past, but every flare-up, of course, carries the risk of a major escalation that will not be brought to an end swiftly.
Yeah, and obviously, Sander, there are talks of now what is going to be included in this second phase, an international stabilization force, among other terms. But of course, the sticking point here is the disarmament of Hamas. If this violence does continue, of course, from both sides, allegedly, what are your hopes for the future of this second phase being implemented?
Well, the upside is that the Americans are still involved. That is what got this whole process moving, and their continued involvement is necessary to basically keep both parties, Hamas as well as Israel, to stick to the Trump 20-point plan. And according to this plan, yes, Hamas will be disarmed, but Israel has to withdraw further to the Israeli border of Gaza, something that has not happened yet as well. So both sides will have to stake steps, but you see the international community preparing for this phase two. So yes, there will be an international stabilization force, but who will take part? Will it be Azerbaijan? Will it be Indonesia? Will they be able and willing to confront Hamas in the process of disarmament? And there's even thoughts that go even further ahead. For example, the European ministers of foreign affairs today are discussing training a police force for Gaza. Well, that is like a dot on the horizon, but the first step, of course, is to make people on the ground, the Israelis and the Hamas fighters, understand that they will have to stop fighting in order to proceed with phase two.
Yes, Sander, do stay with us as we move over from West Asia into Eastern Europe. And of course, a senior Pentagon official led by US Army Secretary Stan Briscoe have arrived in Kiev to discuss efforts to end the war with Russia. Their visit follows reports of a new US-Russia framework peace plan allegedly drafted by Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff and Russia's Kirill Dmitriev, which could require major concessions from Ukraine, including giving up remaining territory in the Donbass and reducing its military. Neither Washington nor Moscow has confirmed the plan, however, but US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said a durable peace will require difficult but necessary concessions. European leaders, including Kaja Kallas and Joan Noel Barrot, warned that any plan must have Ukrainian support and cannot involve capitulation. The report surfaced the same day as a Russian attack on Ternopil killed at least 26 people. Ukrainian officials say Zelensky and Trump have already agreed to stop the conflict along the current front lines and discuss security guarantees. Driscoll's delegation is the most senior US military team to visit Kiev under Trump, focusing on battlefield conditions and possible ceasefire plans. Meanwhile, details of the 28-point Witkoff-Dmitriev plan continue to circulate, though Ukraine maintains it will not cede territory and Russia says its original demands remain unchanged. Joining us once again is Sander van Hoorn to discuss this ongoing situation in Russia and Ukraine. Sander, this is the most senior US delegation to visit Kiev under the second Trump administration. Before we get into the aspects of this new peace plan by Dmitriev and Witkoff, what message is Washington trying to send by dispatching this delegation to Kiev right now?
They want this war to be over. They want another peace deal that Trump can claim he made possible. And the pressure is now on the Ukrainians. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is under heavy fire already internally because of corruption scandals. And now he's facing a deal that he, from his perspective, cannot possibly agree on.
Yeah, and Sander, of course, with Ukraine reportedly losing territory on the battlefield, both in Donetsk and other regions, this 28-point plan reportedly calls for Ukraine to give up the remaining Donbass and scale down some of its military, while Ukraine will receive security guarantees from the Trump administration. Of course, Zelensky has reiterated time and time again its territorial integrity will remain as it is. Do you think this 28-point plan, if the reports do turn out to be true, could be remotely acceptable to Kiev, given the current circumstances?
Well, if you have to draw lines from past remarks by Zelensky, then it will be in no way acceptable. He does not even want to talk about ceding the Crimea region of Ukraine, which has been held by Russia for a long time. And it would not only mean this 28-point plan as we know it from leaks that have transpired so far. It wouldn't only mean like ceding the parts of the Donbas region that are being held by Russia right now. It would mean ceding all of Donbas, so also the parts that are being held by Ukraine right now. Now, that's not only about ceding territory, it's also about being able to defend what's left of Ukraine, because the most active front lines, but also the most active defensive lines that Ukraine holds are located in the Donbas region. So that's a very worrying point. Now, the other points you talked about, like reducing the size of the Ukrainian army and ceding long-range missiles, that is something that may be discussed by Ukraine. They have stated so in the past, but that will also depend on the guarantees, the security guarantees being provided by the Europeans, but notably, of course, by the Americans. And about that detail of the 28-point plan, nothing has transpired so far. So the extent and the toughness of those American security guarantees, a lot of things will depend on that. But the territorial concessions, I think, for any Ukrainian president at this point will be a no-go.
Okay, so Sander, once again, I do request you stay with us for our last update coming out of the Ukraine conflict. And EU foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels amid reports of growing pressure on Ukraine to consider a secretive draft peace plan that would require major concessions for Kiev. The plan, reportedly developed by a US envoy and a Kremlin advisor, would give Russia sweeping control over Ukraine's military and political structure and is widely seen as a form of capitulation. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said any proposal must be backed by both Ukrainians and Europeans to be viable. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot also said peace cannot mean surrender for Kiev and called for a ceasefire along the contact line to begin any serious discussions. Let's in fact listen in to some comments made by the diplomat.
What we as Europeans have always supported is a long-lasting and just peace, and we welcome any efforts to achieve that. Of course, for any plan to work, it needs Ukrainians and Europeans on board. So this is very clear.
Discussions should start with a ceasefire on the contact line that allow for negotiation on the question of territories, on the question of security guarantees. We have said that, the US have said that, President Trump has said that, and Ukrainians are ready for this. The only obstacle to such ordered discussions so far is Vladimir Putin.
Involved. I don't know what the involvement of Ukraine has been in this plan, but obviously for us it is important that whatever peace plan is on the table, that Ukraine is behind it. This is up to Ukraine. It's about Ukrainian territory. It's about Ukrainian sovereignty. So without a buy-in of Ukraine, you won't get the support of the Europeans.
Sander van Hoorn joins us once again. Do you think both the Russians and the Americans are looking at Europe to make any decisions here? Kaja Kallas, of course, says that the plan needs support from Europeans. Does this mean the EU is preparing to openly resit any US-Russia framework imposed from the outside of these discussions?
Well, the problem for the Europeans right now, the foreign ministers meeting in Brussels as we speak, is that they are not privy to the details of the plan. They have not been part of the negotiations about this plan, and that is a big frustration. So will they, just as Ukraine, be left second-guessing what the Americans and the Russians agree upon, and will they be left to pay the bill in the end? That is the questions that will be raised in Brussels today. And can Ukraine actually resist the Americans if they don't agree with the plan? Because the problem is that Ukraine is getting the most of the money from the Europeans, but most of the weapons that are being delivered, and sometimes they are paid for by the Europeans, those are American weapons. So there's only a certain extent that you can say no to the Americans. But the Europeans, and you could hear it in the quotes that you just aired, the Europeans are increasingly worried and frustrated about the way these talks between Russia and America are going.
Sander van Hoorn, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have had your insight here on the programme. We now move on, and at least 26 people have been killed, including 3 children, in a Russian missile strike and drone attack in the western city of Ternopil in Ukraine. The strikes reportedly hit 2 blocks of flats in the western city of Ternopil. Ukrainian President Zelensky has said that 22 people remain missing at the site of the Russian attack in the Ukrainian territory. Ukraine's Air Force said that it had shot down 442 out of 476 drones and 41 out of 48 missiles launched by Russia during the strikes. Energy facilities, transport and civil infrastructure were also damaged elsewhere in western Ukraine. Electrical supplies are already being rationed, and after the latest attacks, the Energy Ministry announced more power cuts across the country. We, of course, will keep you updated on everything coming out of the conflict as soon as we get it here on NewsX World. Now we move over for our final story to South Asia, and as the air quality index in Delhi continues to hover at hazardous levels, residents call for the government to take more action to mitigate the city's crippling pollution crisis. The city's air quality index was recorded at 399, ranked as very poor as per SAFAR, a weather forecasting agency. Delhi and surrounding districts are often covered in smog during winter, as cold, dense air traps emissions from vehicles, construction sites and crop burning pushes pollution levels to among the highest in the world. The Delhi government has imposed a ban on non-essential construction work, among other measures, to deal with the rising pollution levels. Meanwhile, here is what some residents of New Delhi had to say about the state of pollution in the capital.
सर ये पोल्यूशन अब से थोड़ी 10 साल से 15 साल से चल रहा है। इसका कोई स्थायी इलाज नहीं है जब तक सरकार इसके ऊपर गंभीर रूप से काम नहीं करेगी। आप सोच रहे हो गाड़ियां बंद करा दो, इवन रोड करा दो, इससे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ने वाला। टारगेट रखो कि साल के कम से 2 करोड़ पेड़ दिल्ली में लगाने हैं, ये टारगेट रख के चलो। आप सोचोगे आज गाड़ी बंद करा दूँ, कल बिल्डिंग बंद करा दूँ, सरकारी बिल्डिंगों के काम चल रहे हैं, प्राइवेट बंद कर देते हो, इससे कहाँ पोल्यूशन रुकेगा? और कोई सरकार गंभीर नहीं है, पराली हज़ारों सालों से चल रही है, तब दिल्ली में पोल्यूशन नहीं आता। एक ही महीने सोचते पोल्यूशन है, पूरे साल की ये हालत है दिल्ली में।
सर जी ये पोल्यूशन कम होना चाहिए। अब देखो इस पोल्यूशन के चक्कर में मेरी वाइफ इतना बीमार हो रही है कुछ नहीं, उसके चक्कर में सुबह सुबह आना पड़ रहा है मेरे को। हालांकि सरकार कहती है कि सुबह सुबह बताओ पार्क, मगर क्या करें, मजबूरी है, उसको कम करना चाहिए पोल्यूशन।
Now that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. President Donald Trump says he has signed a bill requiring the release of government documents on Jeffrey Epstein. Trump, who had earlier opposed the measure, announces on Truth Social that he has just signed the bill. Senior Pentagon officials led by Army Secretary Dan Briscoe arrive in Kyiv to meet President Zelensky and discuss efforts to end the war with Russia. The visit comes as reports emerge of a new peace plan and after a Russian strike kills 26 people. Ukraine says at least 26 are dead and dozens are injured and missing after a Russian drone and missile strike hit apartment blocks in Ternopil. Officials say nearly 100 are injured as Russia launches hundreds of drones and missiles damaging energy and transport sites. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meets members of Congress in Washington as he promotes deepening economic and security ties with the United States. The visit follows a lavish White House welcome from President Trump, who again defends him over the 2018 Khashoggi killing. Hamas condemns new Israeli airstrikes in Gaza as a dangerous escalation, warning they threaten an already fragile ceasefire. Israel says the strikes respond to a Hamas violation, while medics report at least 25 people killed in the latest attacks. Sudan's army chief, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, says his council is ready to work with the United States and Saudi Arabia to help end the conflict. The statement thanks regional mediators and follows President Trump's pledge to coordinate efforts with Gulf states to stop the fighting. The Israeli military says Hezbollah is violating a ceasefire by rebuilding operations in southern Lebanon near the Israeli border. It says dozens of sites, including headquarters and weapons stores in civilian homes, have been identified around the village of Beit Lif. Australia says a compromise deal will make Turkey the host of next year's COP31 summit, while Canberra leads the government negotiations. The agreement ends a long standoff between the two countries after both refused to withdraw their bids. Now, our top story of the hour comes from the United States, and President Donald Trump says he has signed a bill requiring his administration to release government-held documents related to the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Trump, who had initially opposed the measure, reversed course as the legislation gained momentum in Congress. He announced the signing on his Truth Social platform, declaring he had just signed the bill to release the Epstein files. The move follows comments from U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, who vowed maximum transparency after both chambers of Congress, now under Republican control, voted to mandate the release. Bondi confirmed the Justice Department will publish its Epstein-related materials within 30 days, as the law requires. The release is expected to shed new light on Epstein's activities before and after his 2008 conviction. The case has lingered over Trump politically, fueled in part by conspiracy theories he has echoed to supporters and by lingering public skepticism surrounding Epstein's 2019